Hi.
For those of you that don't already know us, my name is Alyssa.
And I'm Derek. And this is our infertility story.
So Derek and I decided to start documenting our infertility story, not only for our own records, but to help bring awareness to the issue. So our journey started about 4 years ago now. We decided to start trying April of 2013, and we were just trying on our own, you know, expecting it to happen quickly for us. Didn't really think anything of it. But as time went on, I started getting a little concerned because I had always kind of had weird symptoms. Always had daily headaches, really tired, very irregular periods, a lot of abdominal pain that I had been complaining about previously to my OBGYN, who just kind of blew it off and said, well, that's part of being a girl, suck it up, basically. So I was like, okay, well, it must be normal, I guess. So at the end of 2013, Derek got new orders. He was in the Coast Guard. He got orders to Portsmouth, Virginia. So we moved there November 2013. And by this point, my symptoms had gotten a lot worse. I noticed my headaches were getting worse. My abdominal pain was getting worse. I was getting a lot of acne. I was gaining a lot of weight. And I was working out and I just was not able to lose it. So, and my periods were still very irregular. There would be times where I would go 2 or 3 months without one, or I would spot like crazy all throughout the month. And then when I finally moved to Virginia, basically that first month I was there, I was just not doing well. And then Derek deployed about 2 weeks into us moving. So that definitely added a lot of stress onto me, because I was in a new place, just moved in. I mean, we weren't even done unpacking before he deployed. So since we had just moved to a new location, I was on the hunt for a new doctor. I decided to just try a family practice doctor because of all of the symptoms I was having. And then by that point, I had already been on my period for 2 weeks. So right when I went in, she basically right off the bat said, I want to test you for PCOS. I had kind of heard about it because I recently started researching to figure out why I was having all these crazy symptoms, why we weren't being able to get pregnant. So I was kind of putting 2 and 2 together. So I was curious to be tested for it and see if that's what it was. That doctor actually had PCOS herself. So she knew everything involved with it and sent me off immediately to go have a bunch of blood work done and a ultrasound of my ovaries. All tests came back indicating that I did have PCOS. I had the classic blood work, which is basically a hormonal imbalance. My LH and FSH hormones were completely out of whack. My testosterone was way too high, and my ovaries had the classic PCOS look, which is a ton of cysts all around the edge of my ovary, which they call a string of pearls. By the time I was done being diagnosed with PCOS, I had been on my period for 65 days and was put on 2 different types of medications to make the bleeding stop. So at this point, I was kind of irritated because a couple years before, I had an ovarian cyst rupture on me, which was very painful, and went to the hospital for it where an ultrasound was done, and I was looking through my old records, and right on that ultrasound report, it says classic PCOS appearance, but I was never talked to about it. That doctor at the time just completely blew it off and never said a word to me about it. So I technically could have known about this years ago. But I was happy we finally had the diagnosis, so I was hopeful that I would start feeling better and Derek and I would be able to get pregnant. I was put on a medication called metformin because PCOS also causes insulin resistance, which I did have. So I started on metformin in February. Since I had the diagnosis of PCOS, that doctor just immediately referred me to a reproductive endocrinologist because she knew that I would have a hard time getting pregnant. My body was not sending the right signals at the right time. We didn't even know if I was ovulating at this point. Because people with PCOS, they don't ovulate consistently every month. They may every now and then, or may not at all. So I went to a reproductive endocrinologist. That's a doctor who deals strictly with infertility. Was with her for about 3 months before she decided to retire and close her doors. But during that time, I did a lot of blood work, a lot of ultrasounds, and we did 2 months of a medication called Clomid, which is supposed to stimulate your ovaries to develop follicles. The Clomid did not create any follicles for me. So that medication was a bust. I was back to square one trying to find another doctor. But unfortunately, that reproductive endocrinologist was the only doctor that was covered under our insurance at that time. So I went to another OBGYN, and she basically was just going to do the whole Clomid thing again, which I already knew that didn't work, so I didn't even want to waste my time with it. So about 3 months went by, and I finally found a new doctor. Same thing, OBGYN, but she was willing to try a different medication that I had actually researched, and a lot of women had great success with it. So we were excited about that. We did 5 months of a medication called Femera, also known as letrozole. The same idea as Clomid, to stimulate ovaries to create follicles. The first month was a bust, didn't create any follicles, so I was getting a little worried that this wasn't gonna work for me either. So we increased the dose, and from then on out, I was at least creating 2 follicles every single month. So we were super excited about it. We thought we were definitely gonna get somewhere with this. 1 month, we also added in an injection called Ovidril, which is a trigger shot to force your ovaries to ovulate that egg. Because we had been doing months of the Femera, and we knew I was getting follicles, but we still weren't getting pregnant, so we were thinking, okay, well, we have you to the point to where you're developing follicles, but your body is still not sending the right hormones to release the follicles. So we added in the Ovidril. So by this point, I was with this doctor for about 6 months, and I was also expressing to her that I was still having a lot of abdominal pain, especially in my right side. These pains would get 100 times worse about a week and a half before I would start my period every single month. A lot of pressure, a lot of bloating, really bad cramps, stabbing pains, twisting pains. There would be some times to where I would just be walking around and have a super sharp stabbing pain that would literally stop me in my tracks, and I wouldn't be able to move. Breathing hurt. It was awful. I was also having a lot more GI issues, nauseous a lot, not really wanting to eat, and still having very irregular periods. She had mentioned that she thought possibly I had endometriosis, and we talked about doing the surgery, but she was hopeful that she could get me pregnant with the medications. So hopefully we could delay the surgery and possibly not need it. So after these 5 months, after all my research, I realized I wasn't being monitored as well as I wanted to be. I wanted more ultrasounds. I wanted more blood work done at certain times of the month, which some of the blood work was being done, but it just wasn't done on the right days of my cycle. So I figured by this point we needed more help. That's as far as this doctor would go, was just the Femera with the Ovidril. If you didn't have any luck, then you had to go back to your reproductive endocrinologist. So I decided to look for yet another doctor, and I found another OBGYN who had a special interest in infertility. My very first visit with him, he instantly said, you know, we need to do a laparoscopy, we need to go in there, see if you have endometriosis, because everything you're telling me, it sounds like you possibly could. And he also wanted to go in, kind of check out my uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, all that, to see if there was anything he could see that could be affecting why we weren't getting pregnant. March 30th, I went in for my laparoscopy. He also did a DNC, which basically goes in and scrapes out the inside of your uterus to kind of clean everything out, and something called a SHG, which basically is where they inject saline into your uterus to see if it comes out of your fallopian tubes. If it comes out of your fallopian tubes, then there's no blockage. So we did find out after the surgery that I did have stage 3 endometriosis, which is the reason why I was having so much abdominal pain, and endometriosis also can affect your fertility. It can damage your eggs and cause issues when the egg is implanting into the uterus. So endometriosis is basically lesions all throughout your abdomen. They can be all over your organs, even your diaphragm. In my case, it was all over my abdominal cavity, my intestines, my bowels, my bladder, my fallopian tubes, my uterus, everywhere. I also had adhesions, which is scar tissue that can bind your organs together and basically pull them out of their proper positioning. So he had to go in, he got rid of as much of the endometriosis as he could and the adhesions, but he was not able to get the endometriosis off of my bowels because I was not prepped properly, and he would have preferred a GI doctor to do that for me. He had told me I would possibly need surgery again in about a year and a half, because he suspected that my pain would eventually start to come back. So by this point, I had a couple reasons why possibly we weren't getting pregnant. From all my previous ultrasounds, we knew that I have a retroverted uterus, which is a tipped uterus, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and now stage 3 endometriosis. So we had quite a few things working against us at this point. Once I healed from my surgery, we decided to jump right into another round of infertility treatment. We were going to stick with the Femera since we knew that I did respond well to that, but this doctor also wanted to add in a medication called gonal-f. It's basically an injectable FSH hormone, which will help stimulate the follicles to grow and mature properly. So we did 3 months with the Femera, the gonal-f, the trigger shot, and we also added in vaginal progesterone suppositories, since I would always start spotting like a week and a half before I would even start my period. So we were thinking, well, maybe it was low progesterone that was now the issue. So we added that in. And by this point, Derek and I were still just trying the old-fashioned way. 3 months of this with a great response every time. We at least had 2 or 3 follicles each month. We decided that it was time to try an IUI. We were trying to avoid an IUI just because, we wanted to get pregnant on our own like everybody else does. We didn't want to have invasive procedures done, and I guess we were just having a hard time coming to terms with not being able to get pregnant on our own and needing that extra help. But by this point, we were getting pretty frustrated. Month after month, negative pregnancy tests, the medications, the side effects that they were giving me were not very fun. We decided, what the heck, let's try an IUI. Maybe the first time we'll get pregnant. And that was the missing link all along. And we just do one IUI, get pregnant, and be done with this chapter in our lives. So we did the same protocol, the Femera, the gonal-f, the Avidril, and the progesterone. We did 3 IUIs with this doctor with no success, which was disappointing because every time I at least had 2 or 3 follicles. And Derek's semen analysis always came back with great numbers. Everything on paper, it should have worked. By this time, we had done 13 months worth of infertility treatments with no luck. We had a lot going on in our lives, and Derek decided to not renew his contract with the Coast Guard. So we did our last IUI in November of 2015, and I moved back home to Arizona. Derek would not be joining me until May of 2016 when his contract expired. So during this time, I decided to find new doctors. I had a lot more options out in Arizona, so I just went straight for a reproductive endocrinologist. I found one that I really liked in Scottsdale, did a lot more tests with her, did an HSG with her, which is another one of those dye tests, and everything as far as that came back normal. But by this point, I had started noticing that my abdominal pain was starting to come back. Every month, it seemed like it would get a little bit worse than the month before. So I was getting a little worried that I would have to do another surgery sooner than I had expected. After my tests were complete with the doctor in Scottsdale, I decided to go get a second opinion. because at this point we were talking about moving into doing IVF. So the doctor that I was going to get the second opinion with was about an hour away from our house. So I wasn't too thrilled about that, but I figured I might as well go check him out, see if he has any different insight. I actually ended up really liking him and his staff, and his prices were a little bit more affordable than the doctor in Scottsdale. So we decided to switch all of our stuff over to him, do a couple more tests, talk to him about all the abdominal pain I had been having. He definitely said, you know, it might be time for another surgery, but if I can hold out on doing another surgery, then do that, because he was worried that the second round I would start losing like a fallopian tube or an ovary, since my endometriosis was so bad the first time. So he basically said, let's try and either get you pregnant or let's do IVF, freeze all of your eggs, and then do the surgery so you can get some pain relief, but at least we'll have all of those eggs frozen, just in case if I did lose an ovary during the procedure. So after my tests with him, he diagnosed me hypothyroid. So I started a medication for that, and then he also increased my metformin. Once again, I was hopeful that maybe that was the missing link. I was hypothyroid, which can also cause infertility. So now I was being treated for that, and I was finally on the proper dose of metformin. So Derek and I decided, well, let's give it a couple months. Let's see if we can just get pregnant on our own. So month after month after month went by with no luck. So once again, we were unsuccessful. January 2017, we decided it was time to start infertility treatments again. So I went in, did an ultrasound where he found a cyst on my right ovary. He also noticed that some of my follicles were too big at that stage, and he called it something like early recruitment, which basically goes back to my PCOS and my hormonal imbalance, that my body is sending the wrong hormones at the wrong time. So I was creating follicles way too early in my cycle, which would never be mature eggs, never ovulate, and just kind of messes up the whole cycle. The doctor decided to put me on birth control for a month to suppress all of my hormones and to make that cyst go away. So that's where we're at today. I have to go back to the doctor in 1 month for another ultrasound to make sure all of my follicles are at the same size and that cyst is gone. And then we can go ahead and proceed with either IUI or IVF. We initially were talking about starting with IVF since we've already done 3 IUIs. Normally after trying the same treatment for 3 months, it most likely won't work, but you never know what can happen. So we decided to try at least 1 more IUI. Since we're with a new doctor, our lives have completely changed. Our stress levels are so much better now that Derek's out of the military. I'm on different medication. So we figured, what the heck, let's try it again before we go into IVF, which is really invasive. And I would have to do a lot of shots, and I am scared. We will go back to the doctors in a month, see what's going on in there, and then proceed with IUI number 4. We will be updating some videos from here on out about what we're doing infertility-wise. So look out for those and wish us luck. Hopefully 2017 will be our year. Thanks for watching. Bye.